I'm Billy S, and today I'll be talking about what I feel is the worst part of each Legend of Zelda game, given I recently replayed the entire series. This is purely based on my own experience. I'm not expecting everyone to agree with me, it's just me wanting to document my thoughts. So let's jump right in with the original Legend of Zelda. I had two routes I could take here. I could throw the obtuse progression that comes from being such an old game under the bus, which would be very easy to do so. Buying meat for an NPC in a dungeon that you couldn't have predicted, discovering the plethora of secret shops, dens, and other locations in the overworld, figuring out bombable walls by just using your whole stock on every dungeon wall you can find, and having no guidance beyond some cryptic NPC lines. The original game is brutal in 2026. I will always give props to those gamers out there who played this game in the 80s, because you absolutely blazed the trail that we all follow, and I know some of you have watched the channel. But keeping in mind the time it released and how there was a literal hotline for getting tips on how to progress in the game, I think you could substitute that with today's online guides. So instead, I'm gonna nominate this game's combat. It's the first iteration of top-down Zelda swordplay, but that doesn't mean I'm giving it a free pass. There's just something a little miserable about trying to fight Iron Knuckles who can only be hit from the sides or the back, but you don't have any tools to make those encounters easier. Just swing your sword and hope they don't clip you for massive damage. What about the Wizrobes, who are my most hated enemy from the original Zelda for their constant teleporting, projectile magic, and the harder variants being able to just phase around the room trying to telefrag you? I acknowledge that the combat for the time was as good as it was going to get, but it makes going back to play the original Zelda a bit of a chore because I don't find it particularly satisfying to control anymore. For Adventure of Link, I'm gonna leave the side-scrolling 2D gameplay to one side because I actually think it gives the title a ton of charm. It's not the direction that Zelda ultimately went in, and that's fine, but it's so similar to those early Castlevania games, and I think that era has a lot of charm beyond the difficulty. I don't mind hard games, especially when, if you emulate it, you can use save states, and if you're using Nintendo's NES app, you can just rewind time. I make no qualms with using these mechanics to circumvent difficulty, it's a perk of playing the games all these years later. Though I will give an honourable mention to Death Mountain, a maze with extremely tough enemies for the early game that also happens to be mandatory for progression, those fucking Garayas. You almost made it onto the list. What I can't stand though is what happens when that difficulty causes you to get a game over, because if you die enough times, you will be forced to respawn at the starting castle in the overworld no matter how far away you actually are. Zelda 2's map is vast, and you could be all the way over here at one of the final temples, get a game over, and suddenly you end up all the way here in the easy zone. Why they didn't include checkpoints for each temple you visit, or each town you visit, I'm not sure. I don't know if it was too much for the NES, I'm not tech savvy enough to understand, but at least they do give us a checkpoint at the Great Palace, the final dungeon of the entire adventure. It's like putting a plaster on a chopped off limb. A Link to the Past is not one of my favourite Zeldas, I won't lie to you. There's something about it that never clicked with me, despite it being a fantastic game by all rights. And that's made even funnier by me being unable to pick a distinct moment or feature that really grinded my gears. I thought about Moldorm, the boss of the Tower of Hera, because the gimmick of constantly being knocked out of the arena and having the boss regenerate their HP can be brutal if you don't have the patience to finish him off. Sometimes you get lucky and kill him first try, other times you're there for 20 minutes wondering what went wrong. But then I remembered a portion of the Skull Woods dungeon that ground my gears to Kingdom Come. When you reach the final part of the dungeon, you need to progress through a series of puzzle rooms and enemy rooms to reach the boss door. Only in most of these areas, you're hunted by Wallmasters. These are enemies that appear above the player as a shadow. They slam down and attempt to grab Link. If successful, they bring him back to the start of that portion of the dungeon. What's extra frustrating about these Wallmasters is that they also reset the enemies and puzzles of the area. So if you have a lapse in concentration, you get brought back to the entrance, everything is reset, and you have less resources to make it to the boss, who is quite tough, by the way. It's a battle of attrition, and once I got tilted by my first Wallmaster grab, it only makes it easier for the enemy to grab me again and again. No other part of the game annoyed me quite like this sequence, even if, in hindsight, it's not that hard and only wasted 10 minutes of my time. But then, I'm also the guy who thinks the Ice Palace is the best dungeon in A Link to the Past, so maybe I'm the weird one. Link's Awakening was the first handheld Zelda, and with the move to the Game Boy came certain concessions that start to show their age. Though because of the Nintendo Switch remake, some of those sticking points were in fact fixed. Switching items in your inventory was a nightmare in the original game because you would have to pause every single time you needed a new item, and that included switching your sword, shield, boots, power bracelet, and everything else in between. But the remake gives the sword, shield, Pegasus boots, and power bracelet their own dedicated buttons, which means I have to go for something else. Something the remake tried, but kinda couldn't improve on. The boss roster. Link's Awakening has one of the worst boss rosters in the series, with a majority of the nightmares being downright boring boss fights, and only a handful of them stand out. Moldorm, Slimeye, Anglerfish, and Hothead are painfully bad fights, especially Hothead, who doesn't feel like he should be an 8th dungeon boss in terms of difficulty. Facade is iconic, but fits better as a mini-boss like in the Oracle games. Genie is fun, but a little slow-paced, leaving just Evil Eagle and the Slime Eel as the truly difficult, fun encounters. I can forgive the Game Boy games for being simplistic, but I think the remake was an opportunity to enhance these fights, and only the Anglerfish really benefited. The rest all feel the same for good and for bad. At least the final boss was pretty fun though. For Ocarina of Time, this is actually going to be a very quick entry, and it's somewhat similar to my qualms with The Adventure of Link. In that game, when you died, you respawned at the start of the world, which was annoying. Ocarina of Time is a little bit different, but still has some of those issues baked in. Mainly, that when you save the game and close it, you will not be in the spot you saved when you reopen the game. Ocarina of Time will teleport you to 2 locations depending on whether you close the game as Young Link or Adult Link. If you're Young Link, you'll be left at his house in the Kokiri Forest, while if you're Adult Link, you'll be left at the Temple of Time. Now the game does try to get around this by giving you the Ocarina songs of warping for all the different temples and regions, and unlocking those does feel pretty good. But ultimately, I find Ocarina of Time a very difficult game to get around in seamlessly, or at least in an efficient manner. It says a lot when, for the longest time, the meme of Zelda games was that you just had to roll everywhere because that was quicker than walking, and it's only exacerbated when you log back into the game, you've been put into a central location that is nowhere near where you actually need to go. However, if my biggest issue with Ocarina of Time is this quality of life feature about where you spawn, I think that says that it is doing very well for itself. Moving on to Majora's Mask, which used to be my favourite Zelda game until my recent replay. It's a title I've fallen out of love with, but that doesn't change how special the game was to me growing up, even if my tastes have now changed. One thing that didn't change though is how much I dislike the Great Bay questline. While Woodfall, Snowhead, and Akana all have interesting questlines that keep you pressing forwards within their chosen biomes, I can't say the same for the Great Bay. You immediately find and mask Macau before being tasked with rescuing a series of Zora eggs from the nearby pirate fortress. The problem with this questline is that if you don't know it's coming and you haven't been thorough in your journey, you're going to be severely under-equipped, because you need bottles to carry the Zora eggs from inside the fortress, and even if you have the maximum amount of bottles at this point in the game, you still have to make multiple trips to actually collect every egg. This is a tedious amount of back and forth that I just didn't care for, especially when it's not always easy to find the next big bottle upgrade in a Zelda game. They keep those things hidden sometimes, you know? And then 2 of the Zora eggs are in an eel-infested den off the coast with a Lost Woods mechanic needed to reach them. By the time I've saved every Zora egg and hatched the tadpole so we can go to Lulu, her depression has transferred onto me. Thank God I actually like the Great Bay Temple, because if I didn't, this would be a brutal 25% of the game. The 2 Oracle games are next, which I'll keep as a double entry. For Seasons, I didn't have much to complain about, aside from the fact it was clearly meant to be a remake of the first game, and that DNA is all over the overworld and the dungeons. Which is fine, but when you compare it to Ages, which feels like a completely new experience, it makes Seasons feel very derivative. Which is ironic for me, because the part of the game I disliked the most was the Subrosia sections. The one part of the game that is wholly unique to Oracle of Seasons. I don't know what to tell you. I didn't enjoy finding the hidden paths to the underground world and having to come back here multiple times to revisit the Temple of Seasons. There's one moment where a kid steals your rock feather for jumping, and that segment kinda sucked. There's the date part that feels like it was trying and failing to reheat Marin's nachos. Subrosia just didn't feel as fleshed out as I would have liked. But hey, I did enjoy the final dungeon that was down here, it's the best in the game. I just don't care for the rest of Subrosia. While for Oracle of Ages, the worst part is the Crown Dungeon music track. I am generally not that sensitive to bad music. I can put up with a lot for the sake of great gameplay, but this track is ear-bleedingly bad, has no real rhyme or reason or rhythm to it, and that made the first and last time that I muted a Zelda game while I was playing it. The Oracle games have a few misses when it comes to their soundtracks, but it's not the only game on this list where the soundtrack will be getting focus. Wind Waker is a beloved darling of the series, but there is one aspect of the game that has failed to deliver, and even with a rework in the remake on the Wii U, it still sticks out like a sore thumb. And that would be the endgame Triforce quest that sees you collecting the pieces of the Triforce of Courage. The reason why this is being featured in today's video is because it just destroys all momentum within the game. Because you have no more dungeons or cool bosses to face until the end, and instead you just have to roam the open world and figure out what questlines will eventually lead you to these pieces of the Triforce. Not to mention the Tingle C charts of it all that sees you paying everybody's favourite green gimp a buttload of money to actually find the spots needed to dredge them up. Wind Waker was known for having some development issues late into the game, and I suspect there was at least one more dungeon planned that would make the Triforce chart quest a little more bearable. But that never materialized, and instead we have to go on a Metroid Prime-style artifact hunt before we can actually finish the game, which works in a Metroidvania that's a series built on backtracking. Not so much in Wind Waker, especially when in the original game, which is still the easier one to play thanks to being on Nintendo's GameCube app, your sailing speed is woefully slow. The swift sail on the Wii U really makes it a completely different experience. For the Minish Cap, this is the first time where I'm going to cite a completely optional experience as the worst part of the game. Because the dungeons and the main story are all genuinely fantastic, I have no notes, I think it is one of the cleanest 2D Zeldas, and I think the Minish gimmick works incredibly well. So, I had to get creative. Honourable mention, though, goes to Minish Cap's European release, which is literally an earlier build of the game than what Japan and North America got. We have certain tougher enemies, there is an entire bomb bag upgrade that is not included, there's a heart container and a Minish cave in town that is easier to collect in the North American and Japan versions, and most importantly, the gacha system for collecting figurines is less streamlined and has longer animations. Which is part of my most hated feature in the Minish Cap, the piece of heart that can only be obtained by fully completing the Gachapon figurine collection. That's all 130 figurines that can be obtained before beating the game, which will allow you to access a house containing the final piece of heart. I don't think you understand just how painful it is to go through this process, as you need so many mysterious shells to trade at the gacha, and the percentage of getting new figurines lowers with every successful figure. You also need to be far enough in the game to have access to every figure, and it's up to you whether you do the gacha in one massive go or visit the shop every dungeon to collect the new figures accessible. Either way, it might be my least favourite heart container in the entire series, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to ever do it unless you're a hardcore completionist who has enough free time to jump in. Stepping into Twilight Princess, there are two aspects of the game that I've always been quite lukewarm on. The first is the item selection you obtain from dungeons. Something that's been pointed out over and over is that many of them don't have a lot of usage outside of the main story. The spinner is one of the coolest traversal items in the series, but aside from a very small handful of spots in the game, it gets zero use. The ball and chain is a powerful tool. The Dominion Rod has the potential for really cool puzzles in the open world, but again, not really much use. It's a real missed opportunity, but I still think the items are awesome on their own in their respective dungeons, and I want the spinner to come back in the next Zelda game. My true gripe with Twilight Princess has, and will always continue to be, the horseback combat. I love riding Epona in Zelda games, but both when I was a kid and now as an adult, I still find the horseback combat sections of this game to be incredibly difficult. Whether that's fighting against King Bulblin and his crew, or the third phase of the Ganondorf fight at the very end of the game. I always felt like multitasking riding the horse and fighting in combat was something I was never good at. It didn't feel natural. Though to be fair, I still have this issue even in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and funnily enough, it's an issue that's been cropping up in other games as well, like the Final Fantasy VII Remake games, because their motorbike mini-games are basically the same concept. I just don't like horseback combat that feels clunky, and I think it needed a lot of work to feel smooth and clean like the rest of Twilight Princess. Hello there, Phantom Hourglass. I'm gonna do you a solid because today I am not talking about the Temple of the Ocean King. To put it bluntly, I am a defender of the Temple of the Ocean King. You use your new items to unlock shortcuts to beat the portions of the temple you've already done at a quicker pace, and it fits the handheld DS nature of this game. They were aiming for a casual audience to pick up and play in short bursts. The early DS was not for gamers, it was for everyone, and I don't blame Nintendo for cashing in on that. That being said, where Phantom Hourglass did drop the ball, and this is something I think we can all agree with, is that classic Zelda soundtrack. I don't think Phantom Hourglass has a good OST. A majority of the game's music is inherently repetitive, and nowhere is this clearer than in the themes for the caves, the dungeons, and just being out in the wilderness. I'll play all three tracks for you in order right now, and you can make the judgment yourselves. It's so repetitive. And for a series known for its iconic music, dare I say, unforgivable. And yet this is in the same game as Linebeck's theme, one of the best in the series? Make it make sense. Moving on to Spirit Tracks, I do love the train as a concept. I think it's a wacky Nintendo idea that reskins the Phantom Hourglass travel system, but gives us on-rail routes instead of a fully open ocean. They were able to tailor specific secrets to rails that you could unlock by completing side quests that made more rails appear throughout the various lands, and I think that's really fun. Except, as I last played Spirit Tracks, my aim was to go for a completionist playthrough for footage purposes, and I realised that the longer I played the game, the less fun I was having. Because to complete Spirit Tracks, you have to go back and forth and back and forth and through warp gates and chart paths that aren't even optimal. It really highlighted how slow the train actually was at getting from place to place, and clearly I've just been brain rotted so much that I didn't have the same patience from when I was 13. There's just not enough player control beyond the speeds, and then when you add the escort missions that ask you to comply to the rules of the road with whistling and speeding up and slowing down at specific signs, it just lost its luster for me. I think playing this game casually and just chugging the main story would have kept me satisfied, but going for the completion, you start to see the train coming undone at the seams, which is a real shame. But at least I still have those memories from when I was younger. Also, honorable mention to that fucking pan flute. It's awful on the Wii U. Awful! Skyward Sword is the last game I played in the series, so all my feelings towards this title come from my experience with the Switch remaster, and overall, I had so much fun. It's an experimental leap with the combat, requiring precision slices and a thoughtful approach. The dungeons are all generally good to fantastic, to top 10 tier quality. The music is joyous and orchestral and everything you want from a Zelda game, and even the world exploration is a lot of fun, even if it's condensed into an overly small set of regions. Where my issues with Skyward Sword come is the repetitiveness. The first half of the game sees you visiting the Farron, Eldin, and Lanayru regions and completing their respective dungeons. The second half of the game sees you visiting the Farron, Lanayru, and Eldin regions and completing more of their respective dungeons. And then it sees you revisiting them a third time to get the Song of the Hero from each of the 3 dragons. The first half of the game sees you fighting Girahim as the boss of your first temple and the Imprisoned at the Sealed Grounds. The second half of the game sees you fighting Girahim as the boss of your 6th temple and the Imprisoned 2 more times at the Sealed Grounds. Girahim disappoints me especially because I really look forward to new bosses at the end of Zelda dungeons, what creatures are lurking that we need to take down, and having 2 of the 6 main dungeons with bosses be just Girahim is really frustrating. I wanted another Moldarak or Koloktos style fight that really leans into the mechanics of the items we got. We don't even use the Molmits in the boss of the temple, that's devastating. And the Imprisoned 3 times? I really tried to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. I had heard all the bitching since 2011, but I thought maybe people are being dramatic. It wouldn't be the first time. But no, dealing with the Imprisoned 3 separate times, I saw what they were going for, but in execution, it's just not a fight that worked. And it's what I think I'll be dreading if I ever decide to replay Skyward Sword anytime soon. Moving on to A Link Between Worlds, I vastly prefer this game to A Link to the Past. It's the same universe and it's the same Hyrule, but the way they handle Hyrule and Lorule is just more interesting to me than the Light World Dark World split from the older game. It's non-linear in how you progress, as once you beat the first major dungeon, you have the ability to complete either the House of Gales or Tower of Hera in either order, and once you reach Lorule, you can beat all those dungeons in any order just as well thanks to the rental system. Now, I'm not bothered by the rental system. It punishes players who die by forcing you to trek back to your house to re-rent an item and eventually purchase it, which sounds annoying, but as said, you have to die. And in my last playthrough of A Link Between Worlds, I didn't die once. Not a single game over, because, and this is my complaint, A Link Between Worlds is just too easy of a Zelda game. There are 2 factors for this, the first being that as a modern game, it has omnidirectional movement and your weapon hitbox is a lot more forgiving than the older games. We're taking top-down Zelda that was difficult due to the limitations of the hardware back in the day and seeing what happens when it has a modern twist, and that modern twist makes a lot of enemy encounters that were once considered difficult incredibly easy. The other issue is that the non-linearity means there truly isn't a difficulty curve when it comes to the game's dungeons. They are all designed with the idea that you'll be visiting this one first. What I wish is that the dungeons would scale their enemies in difficulty based on how many you've completed, even if that means making a few damaged sponge enemies to test you in the late game. The puzzles are fantastic all around, but the combat is so blink and you'll miss it that you can really speed through the game without fully taking in what you're fighting as you progress. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom solved this issue of difficulty because in Breath of the Wild, each divine beast had its own layer of complexity with the moving parts, while Tears of the Kingdom scaled up the enemies in each temple the same way as the rest of the game does. A Link Between Worlds really needed that. By the way, I didn't include Four Swords Adventures, or Triforce Heroes in this video because they are multiplayer Zelda games that I don't really have access to. Well, I do have access to Triforce Heroes, but I was wondering if people would actually be interested in me trying it out single player. Let me know in the comments below if you want to see a Triforce Heroes boss ranking. Now, speaking of the Wild games, Breath of the Wild is next, and there has always been one element of Breath of the Wild that has disappointed me since launch. It's one of my favourite Zelda games, it has some of the best exploration and characterization in the series, Hyrule feels so realised, and yet you can't say the same for the game's enemy roster. Breath of the Wild chose to go with a more compact set of monsters for Link to fight, but when you're asking them to populate such a wild, vast world, the seams start to show. Bokoblin and Moblin camps are cute the first dozen times you fight them, not so much when you're in the endgame and they've upgraded to their white variants who are not worth killing. Lizalfos are somewhat fun with their different variations, and Wizrobes coming in various colours is kind of entertaining. But then you get to the Divine Beasts and you're just fighting random Malice spawners and corrupted Guardian Scouts exclusively. Past Zelda games had different enemies based on the regions you were exploring, which varied wildly in concept and design. Now we just get the same 6 enemies on repeat with varying flavours of fire, electric, and ice. Lynels were the only exception, being a fantastic redesign of an old series staple who finally feel as threatening in 3D as they were with their sword beams in 2D. But they can't save the roster from feeling so repetitive. My last playthrough saw me collecting every Korok seed and completing every shrine alongside the main quest, and by the end, let me just say I didn't want to see another Bokoblin, Moblin, or Lizalfos for years. For our penultimate game, let's take a look at Tears of the Kingdom, and this is the first entry where I'm going to focus entirely on the game's story. Look, Breath of the Wild was novel in its ability to let us go wherever we wanted. It expanded on what A Link Between Worlds began, and you could tackle each of the 4 main regions in any order. But that came at a narrative cost, as each of the 4 regions hit the same story beats with the same overall formula. And Tears of the Kingdom just does the exact same thing, beat for beat, all over again. 4 regions that need your help. You find the kingdom's main character, they join your crew to discover a way to reach the temple of the region, you clear the temple, beat the boss, you get a cutscene, move on. It'd be more forgivable if we didn't have to sit through the same cutscene 4 separate times explaining the Demon King and the secret stones to the sages. It's been memed to death, we've all seen the video. Shout out to Sidon being the only one to have a slightly different response here. The problem with non-linear storytelling is that your narrative is far less compelling because you need to treat every region like it could be a person's first. You don't get real development in the narrative department until you end the regional phenomenon quest. And then there's Link's memories from Breath of the Wild being brought back in the form of Zelda's memories. Except worse, because you can spoil major plot points way earlier into the story than intended. I'm just tired of the let's drip feed you info from the past concept. It worked in Breath of the Wild because we were recovering our own memories. They felt personal to us, unearthing Link as a hero. And while it is interesting hearing about Zelda's storyline, you don't have that same connection. And then the endgame plays out exactly the same in both games too. Climactic battle against the final boss in the Hyrule Castle area, leading to the antagonist abandoning all sense of self and reason to kill the protagonist, resulting in a battle against a demonic beast for the final fight. Calamity Ganon and the Demon Dragon are the same fight, I will take no further questions. Tears of the Kingdom plays better, has better enemy variety, has more interesting tools in terms of how complex the puzzles can be built around them, and yet I feel it is so much more derivative of Breath of the Wild than people want to admit, and it adheres to that game's formula a little bit to a fault. It's still a masterful game. I watched my boyfriend play through Tears of the Kingdom over the last month, and it still holds up. But I need a switch up for the next big Zelda, and that starts with not rehashing the same story beats over and over again. What I'm saying, bring back the Deku Scrubs. Oh wait. Finally, we've made it to Echoes of Wisdom, the latest game in the Zelda series. I have a lot of love for this experimental title. You finally get to play as Zelda, and your ability to store and use echoes gives you a lot of freedom on how to solve puzzles in a top-down plane. I don't even mind that we're in A Link to the Past Hyrule for the 3rd time because they actually expand the map in all directions, allowing for the various races of Hyrule to exist. Gorons, Zora, Gerudo, and even the Deku Scrubs are back, the little freaks. But where Echoes of Wisdom keeps me hesitant to sit back and replay it is the game's combat. I know what they were going for, wanting you to defeat and capture the echoes of enemies so that you can use their powers for yourself, and there is nothing more satisfying than encountering a super rare high-level enemy, killing it, and being able to summon it at will. In the same vein though, I think the concept of spam summoning enemies to do your dirty work can get a tad boring, because you're not really an active participant in combat, you're delegating monsters to do the heavy lifting for you. You do gain the ability to briefly channel Link's power and wield a sword via a special meter, which is fun, but it does make the rest of Zelda's kit a tad obsolete, and you can use it as a crutch to bypass a ton of enemy encounters throughout the game. Echoes of Wisdom is at its best when it's asking you to either platform, solve puzzles, or use your echoes in increasingly complex ways to make your way forwards. Otherwise in combat, just summon your strongest attack echo and vibe. By no means do I think the combat is awful, but I do think it's the element of Echoes of Wisdom that feels the weakest. Well, that and the UI ripped from Tears of the Kingdom that is a slog to sift through, but that's more of an honourable mention. I'm also kind of over the minimalist UI elements. Let's bring back some whimsy, Nintendo. Come on, Ocarina of Time remake better bring me the whimsy. And that's my list. Do you guys agree with my Zelda opinions? Probably not, but let me know down below. Let me know what your least favorite aspects of each Zelda game is and how you would improve each game. And I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.